Good afternoon. Welcome to this presentation on AI governance. So let's start off. We talked this morning really about what the future looks like. In today's session, I want to zero in maybe on a more pressing concern for many of us right now. Okay? So the question of who is actually flying our AI as it gets into production. And to get us started, why don't we be real about the current state of enterprise AI for many of our customers today? Honestly, outside of that keynote hype we heard this morning, we are living in two different worlds. So first of all, you've got your traditional ML models, the workhorses in organizations, deeply embedded within the business. They're running solutions like pricing, forecasting, churn prediction, a whole lot more besides. Really fundamental to most of the businesses at the conference today. The problem is, what we find is that many folks are actually running these on fragile infrastructure, held together by custom scripts, often a sprinkle of hope as well. So what starts off really as simple tech debt quickly becomes this quiet accumulating risk. We've got models that decay, we've got bias creeping in. We often don't even notice until the damage has been done. Meanwhile, on the right-hand side, we've got this much louder revolution happening with Gen AI. Your teams are connecting to LLMs directly to live systems. You're building agents that are not just predicting, they're also creating, they're reasoning, they're acting. And the risk here is anything but quiet decay. It is sudden, catastrophic failure. Think of a single interaction causing a major data leak, a brand-damaging hallucination that gets served up to one of your key customers. Also, most of these apps are being built, let's say, without the basic safety guardrails that we'd expect from much of the other types of enterprise software. And I want to give you that picture. That's the landscape. We've got mature models that are increasingly fragile under the covers, and we've got revolutionary ones that are often being deployed recklessly, maybe in the spirit of innovation. So the core challenge is pretty clear. How do we govern both effectively and stay in control? Well, first, we don't start from scratch. We build from a position of pretty incredible strength with decades of good data governance. And my analogy for the day is think of data governance like running an airport. So we think about data governance, we think about the mission critical work that has to be perfect before a plane can take off. And I want to walk you through, first of all, maybe the ground operations. We've got data policies. They're kind of like the architecture of the airport. They're our runways, our terminals, our data pipelines, our data warehouses, the blueprint for the entire system that defines what is safe and what is legal in terms of operations on the ground. Next up, data quality. Kind of like our fuel control. Every aircraft needs clean, high-grade fuel. Our AI models, absolutely no different. And we've got pretty good at this because we know that bad fuel means that flights get grounded. Simple as that. Data lineage, kind of an obvious analogy, a bit like baggage handling. We have become experts over the last decade or so at tagging, tracking, routing critical data from source through to target system. We prove data integrity at every step of that logistics process. And then finally, cute little picture, security and stewards, they're kind of like the ground crew. They protect the perimeter, they manage access, they guide users to make sure that assets are safe and that they get used correctly. Architecture, fuel, logistics, security. We have built this world-class ground operation, but this entire system is built on one pretty powerful limiting assumption. These assets are safely on the ground. What happens when our engines start and the plane takes flight? And right now, we've got to think of all of our AI models as planes in the air. The moment they leave the gate, the rules of the ground are no longer enough. The risks are entirely different. And we urgently need to move beyond what is traditional data governance. And we have to shift our thinking probably in two key ways. First of all, we've got to govern the engines and not just the fuel. So our data governance practices have really ensured that we've got clean, well-sourced, secure data to work with. But remember, AI governance is fundamentally different. It's about controlling live running engines, systems in flight, the models themselves. So we've got to confront a whole new class of risk that can happen in flight. Things like subtle model bias, things like black box decisions or ethical breaches that can cause immediate commercial reputational damage. And these risks don't always exist. They're not always apparent when that data is sitting inside the hangar. Secondly, we've now got to manage the entire flight, not just those pre-flight checks. So you think about a pre-flight check, kind of like a data control. Those things are critical for data at rest, but their responsibility mostly ends at that departure gate. AI governance, on the other hand, covers the entire life cycle, managing the model from design, training, deployment, through to continuous in-flight monitoring, all the way through to a safe final landing and retirement. So not a one-time check, much more of a constant, proactive process. So we need a system that can monitor planes safely for the entire duration of the flight. So if data governance is the airport on the ground, what looks after the sky? What's the answer to our new in-flight risks? How about that central control tower that's really at the heart of AI governance? The role in the process fundamentally shifts for all of us. We change from being ground crew through to being air traffic control. So this kind of approach gives us a single, centralized view of every AI model in flight across the organization. Everything from takeoff to landing. And you know, if I've learned anything in the past year at being at Dataiku, it's that with AI, when things go wrong, it can go wrong very fast and it can go wrong without warning. We simply can't afford to have unmonitored rogue models in our operational airspace. So the job of this central control tower is to guide every model with clear, consistent rules, actively monitoring for risk and preventing collisions between different projects. So what does this control tower actually do? How do I take this big idea of control and make it a practical reality in our operations? So I think we can break down AI governance into 4 key functions, 4 simple, powerful words that define a trustworthy AI practice. Oversight, transparency, explainability, and integrity. 4 pillars that we need to build in our practice. For the next few minutes, I'm going to walk through each one and really explore what it means in our world. So the first pillar, let's dive into oversight. In our control tower, this is the most fundamental function. Can you see every plane in your sky? Do you have a central inventory of every model, who owns it, and why it exists? If you don't have this, you end up getting what's called shadow AI. And this is a risk that's pretty close to home. Take a look at this story here. You've probably all heard of this story, but I'm going to dig a little bit deeper. Air Canada. A customer asked their official website chatbot about bereavement policies for flights. The AI confidently hallucinated, told the customer they could get a refund after booking the flight. The customer trusted this response, they booked the ticket, and then got denied. So what did they do? They sued. And in court, what was really a simple technical error started to become this governance catastrophe. Air Canada's lawyers got involved. They said they weren't responsible for the chatbot, claiming it belonged to a separate legal entity, not Air Canada directly. They kind of created this accountability vacuum by almost disowning their own technology. Now, luckily, thankfully, the court kind of got rid of that argument pretty quickly. Air Canada was forced to pay, suffered a wave of negative press as a result. But the entire episode stems really from one root cause, this fundamental lack of oversight. We had an unmonitored AI allowed to operate without guardrails, creating a massive liability. And it's really the perfect example of why the first job for our control tower is to create that centralized registry, a single source of truth for all of our models, because you can't govern what you can't see. So how do we prevent another incident like this? How do we actually start to get rid of shadow AI? We need to shift our thinking away from the data governance world, away from static data catalogs and to a more dynamic, maybe a more real-time approach and a real-time system of record for our AI models. And today, I think this solution has got 2 parts. First of all, and we've seen a little bit of this morning, the centralized project and model registry. This is like the foundation for our control tower. A single source of truth from initial idea. If you've got an idea and it's on the back of a napkin that you've had over lunch, brilliant, let's get it into the registry, all the way through to production. This is how you start to eliminate blind spots. There are no more unknown models. You get to see everything and you get to strategically qualify each project by its value before you commit strategically to develop it further. However, visibility isn't quite enough. We also need to talk about the idea of business-friendly approval workflows. So these are like your AI flight plans, if you like. They exist to enforce consistency, repeatability in the process for each project, rather than dealing with all of this ad hoc, undocumented development. The most powerful part of this second side is where we get to embed custom sign-offs directly into the process. So we can bring legal and compliance and HR into the plane's cockpit at exactly the right moment. So a model literally cannot be deployed to production until they've given their approvals. And crucially, we've designed this to be accessible to non-technical users. Your lawyer doesn't need to read Python, for example. Instead, they get a clean summary, they provide their input, and all of this creates a permanent audit trail. So we get to combine that central registry, that's our visibility, with approval workflows, and we solve this oversight problem. You shine a light on every project, you ensure that each one flies with a coherent, approved AI flight plan. So once we've got oversight covered, let's talk about transparency and explainability. It's not enough for the control tower to see every plane. It needs to understand why each one is changing course. Flying blind, generally not a good outcome for anybody. A perfect example of this is the Apple Card scandal from a few years back. So first of all, if you've not heard of it, the incident itself, the algorithm offered a husband, a pretty famous Silicon Valley developer, 20 times the credit limit of his wife, even though she actually had the better credit score. Basically, a black box decision that looked exactly like gender bias. And again, a mishandled response that went public in a really big way. So the customers demanded an explanation. The official answer was, we don't know, the algorithm decided, not a good start. But it turns out that no one could explain the logic. This was basically computer says no, but at a global brand scale. So the fallout here, immediate and incredibly brutal. There was public outrage, of course. There was reputational damage to both Apple and Goldman Sachs, the banking partners behind the card. And then, to cap it all off, a formal investigation by the regulators. And really, this was the scandal that kind of kick-started the wake-up call around AI governance in general. Because if you can't interrogate the why behind an AI decision, you can't manage its risks, you can't prove its fairness, you cannot govern it. So a lack of transparency doesn't just create software bugs or unhappy customers, it starts to create regulatory nightmares, and there's your real problem. So that's why our control tower must have the power to open the black box. We have to demand the why. So I see this again working on two levels. For technical teams, that's me on the left, we need to provide deep, granular explainability. Capabilities like feature importance to see what really matters. Individual explanations to see why a specific decision was made. And this is essential for teams to debug, to validate, to ship models confidently. What about for the business teams? Let's take a look on the right-hand side. We need to be able to provide interactive simulators that allow them to probe a model's logic and its decisioning without needing the ability to code directly. So in the Apple Card case, we could have had a support agent toggling some of these inputs. What if incomes were higher? And the outcome would have shifted immediately, transforming that AI from a black box into a much more transparent tool. So basically, give the builders the diagnostics they need, give the business the controls that they need. And only then can we really answer that question, why? Now, explaining a single decision, let's say to an auditor, is kind of a reactive process. True governance needs to be much more proactive. You need to have this living record of your model's entire journey. So the data, the code, the algorithm, every change you make over time. And we achieve this by replacing generally disconnected scripts and static documents with a system that tracks the entire AI pipeline, visually and automatically. And you know, it starts with a visual flow. That's our single source of truth. We pull critical business logic out of siloed notebooks. We map the whole process, everything from data prep through to deployment. And this becomes our living, auditable blueprint for your work. The blueprint, in turn, enables model lineage. For any prediction, we can instantly trace it back to its origin, creating an audit trail for compliance or for debugging. And then finally, once you've got this in place, the documentation itself needs to become automatic. We eliminate the scramble to create reports after the fact. And in fact, we can generate comprehensive, standardized documentation with just a single click. So your projects are always then audit ready without any manual overhead. And as a result, your models aren't just explainable, they're repeatable, they're auditable, they are compliant by design. Without transparency and integrity, even technically perfect models will fail. I've got a classic example for you now, Amazon's recruiting AI. So they fed it 10 years worth of hiring data. The AI learned from the data, and in doing so, learned to be pretty biased against women, downgrading their resumes automatically as part of its scoring. The why here is actually really simple: a colossal failure of governance. The model was built in a silo. The technical team never collaborated with HR or legal or DEI departments. Even a single conversation with a business stakeholder about the historical bias in the underlying data should have stopped this disaster before it started. And this, I think, proves a pretty critical point. AI governance isn't this checkbox that you add at the end of a project. It's really a collaborative framework that you start with. It's how you ensure that models aren't just accurate, they're fair, they're aligned with your company values. So we prevent disasters like this by building integrity into the process with the right tools at the right time. First of all, let's talk about continuous monitoring. Every model in production needs automated health checks. We continuously test for fairness to catch bias against protected groups. Honestly, the exact check that would have halted the Amazon model in its tracks. We also monitor for things like performance drift, model drift, getting an alert as soon as the model's accuracy degrades, replacing manual, high-effort spot checks with automated vigilance. Secondly, on the right-hand side, let's talk audit readiness. Audits really should not be a 6-month fire drill, although I suspect everybody in the room knows differently. A centralized system that can create this immutable, time-stamped log of activity, everything from decisions to approvals and performance checks all in one place. So when a regulator asks a question, the answer is just a click away, not a lengthy investigation. In fact, it's way past having this as a nice to have. With major regulations like EU AI now in force, having this built-in audit process is kind of a fundamental requirement for doing business in 2025. So our last pillar, integrity, affects a new fleet of generative AI models. Look at the headline here from Samsung. Their employees, simply trying to be productive, pasted confidential information, proprietary source code, directly into a public AI. So this creates an instant nightmare. You've got, first of all, a massive IP leak, but also private data now potentially training a competitor's model. So a pretty stark reminder that without new specialized guardrails, the tools that were meant to increase productivity actually become our biggest vulnerability overnight. So how do we prevent this from occurring in your organizations? You need a secure, centralized platform to manage these kinds of powerful tools, which is exactly what a modern AI platform should provide. It all starts down here at the bottom with this concept of the LLM mesh. So think of this as a single, secure gateway to any model that you want to use, from OpenAI to Anthropic to your own self-hosted models, giving you flexibility and absolutely preventing vendor lock-in. Crucially, layered on top of this are the LLM guard services, real-time security checkpoints that solve the problem we just saw. You've got a safeguard to detect and block PII or sensitive data from being leaked. You've got a quality guard to check for hallucinations and relevance. You've got a cost guard to prevent runaway spending on AI. And only when you've got these guards in place can your teams start to build out with some of the Gen AI accelerators here at the top of the diagram to innovate and to build solutions. You'll also note on the right-hand side, the entire process is wrapped in that dedicated AI governance framework, making sure you've got that full registry and keeping you in line with the latest regulations. So it's how you get the full power of generative, agentic AI with the safety and controls that your enterprise demands. So to bring it all together, I want to leave you with this final point. To be truly valuable, and more importantly, to be safe, your models, your new agents, must be part of a single universal AI strategy, a platform that looks a little bit like this. This is where all your teams, everyone from data scientists through to risk managers, through to governors, can create not just agents, but also the foundational analytics and predictive models all in one place. So it means you can clearly connect your new agents to your existing data and machine learning assets. They're all built on top of this secure LLM mesh that we discussed earlier. And most importantly, I think everything that you see here, every analytic, every model, every agent gets managed by the same central governance framework. One set of rules, one registry, one control tower for your sky, because it's the only way to provide the right controls for every type of AI that you create. So no matter what your teams are building, whether it's analytics, whether it's models, whether it's agents, you are always going to know who is flying your AI. So if you're interested in learning more, please scan this QR code, grab a free copy of our practical guide to using generative and agentic AI with governance across the enterprise. And thank you very much for attending.